Welcome, Dr. Courtney Crisp, to the Hola Gwapa Podcast. Dr. Courtney is not only a therapist, writer, editor, and speaker, but she is also my former neighbor based in San Diego, California. Today's episode is so important because together we sit down and dive deep into topics like the importance of mental health and wellness in the creative community, eating disorders, and her personal career trajectory and niching down to become the therapist she is today. So, if you're a lover of the arts but find yourself interested in pursuing a more traditional path, or you just like to learn more about the why behind mental health and eating disorders, then this is the conversation for you. And with that, let's get into the episode.
Yeah, so hi guys, my name's Dr. Courtney Crisp. So I'm a therapist. Right now I work mostly with patients with eating disorders. I work at a major medical center in the Bay Area. I'm also a writer and an editor, so I do those kind of things on the side. I'm also starting to dabble into some speaking and things like that. So yeah.
Love it. And for a little context for our audience too, you and I actually used to be neighbors in San Diego. So that's how we connected.
Yeah.
And I know you're, a huge lover of the creative community and started following Hola Gwapa and actually attended some of the Hola Gwapa events back in the day, the OG events.
I did. They were so fun. Nisha, it's funny. I've never told you this story, but I was like, I'm going to tell her today. But before you moved in, I was just like in my second year of grad school and like just kind of miserable and like just trying to get through it. And grad school is so tough, especially for like, I don't know, professions where there's like a clinical element because you're going to class and then you're doing your clinicals and you don't have a lot of time. And I was like, oh, I like want more creativity in my life. And then you moved in downstairs and I was like, oh my gosh, she's like marbling dog leashes. This is so fun.
Yes. Back in the day, I was marbling dog leashes, marbling probably everything I could dip in a marbling bucket. And I remember we did like some vision board parties and you were always just game to show up and share your knowledge. And I think, you've advanced so much in your professional career since then, moved to San Francisco. So I'd love to start at the beginning and just kind of understand like was there a moment in time where you can remember like kind of first embarking on this journey in regards to therapy, right? Like, were you always that friend that people went to? How did it all start for you?
Yeah, yes, definitely. To answer that question of like, was I always the friend that, I think I've always honestly been more of like a listener than a talker. Like I was always really, really shy. And I was always really just observant of everything. So I think, and I moved around a lot as a kid. I don't know. You probably don't know that about me, but I lived in like 5 states and like 13 cities or something like that growing up. Yes, I was always used to having to like make new friends and like learn how to fit in. And like, I think tracing that back, I kind of learned to do that through like observing people and listening because I had to kind of pick up on social cues and figure out like how to like make friends. So I think, and then my interest in eating disorders, I think started more in like high school and junior high. Like I was always really into sports and I think, so I saw like on the one hand, how like, in sports, the relationship between like your physical and your mental health could be really positive and sports could be like really empowering, but then also how it could be really like toxic if like, you're like, trying to have a certain body type or, I think sports can be both really positive for body image, but also detrimental, like depending on the situation. So I think I could probably trace my interest in eating disorders back to that. So
that's super fascinating. Definitely want to unpack that a little bit more. But first I kind of want to get into like, okay, so what was your journey with education like? So you kind of already had this, innate listening ability and kind of where was that friend that everybody would go to if they were having a problem or concern and then moving around a lot. How did you start to figure out, okay, I can make a career of this?
So I remember I graduated in 2011, which I don't know if you remember, but it was like a really bad recession. Like so I just remember graduating college and like everyone was having a really hard time finding a job. So I moved back in with my parents and my parents own a business and I was working for them for a while, like while I kind of figured out what I wanted to do. And so I was working in sales for them, which my parents are like natural born salespeople. They're like really good at it. And it's not, I kind of learned how to do it, but it's not, I would say, my like top strength. So I was just, but I did notice like what I really enjoyed about sales was like the like connecting with people and like building rapport really quickly. And like, I would always do things like, if you go into someone's office, like I would just comment on things they had on their wall and like try to engage them with their interests and things like that. And I just noticed, I was like, yeah, like I really enjoy like building these connections, and like the kind of the sales part of it is harder for me, the like kind of having to like push things or whatever. But I was like, yeah, I think I really do enjoy this, like connecting with people. And I noticed that people just like kind of naturally opened up to me, even just in that role of sales. Like I noticed people just kind of told me their problems, and
You're like, I might as well get paid for this.
Yeah. So
awesome. And kind of after that role with your parents, how did you transition into the career path that you're on today?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So my undergrad degree was actually in English. And I always wanted to write, but I wasn't like quite sure what that would look like in terms of practically, because I was also like, okay, I need to like, pay rent too. So and yeah, so then when I was like, okay, I think I want to be a therapist and go back to school, and like hopefully I can write on the side. Like that was kind of always my thinking. I was like, okay, should I do the master's or the doctorate? But the tricky part was like it can be really hard to get into doctorate programs for psychology. And I was kind of coming into it without an undergrad degree in psychology, which like most people are. Like most people kind of come into it being like, okay, I want to get a doctorate. I'm going to get my undergrad degree in psychology and kind of go on this journey. So I was like, okay, I probably have to get a master's degree first. And at the time I was thinking, okay, like if I like it, I can just stop there. I'll do like a MFT or MSW, which are marriage and family therapist or masters of social work, and which are both, great degrees. And both of those, degrees have their own kind of strengths and focuses. But I've just, I've always really liked school, and I've always really liked kind of the academic part of psychology too. So that's kind of why I was thinking long term I wanted to get the doctorate. So so then I started in Pepperdine's MFT program, which I was still living at home, and I started working as like more of like a guidance counselor role, because I was trying to get like close to clinical experience, but I wasn't like quite getting that yet. So I started working. I was like helping kids apply to college and like write their essays for getting into college. So it was kind of like using my English skills. That was like my transition job, I feel like. So I did that when I was in school, in my master's program. Yeah. And then, I graduated, and I was like, okay, I think I want to still go for the doctorate. And I was like, all right, I need to get more research and clinical experience. So I worked at a eating disorders residential treatment center for 2 years. And that was really great. And then I also worked in research at Stanford. So, which I also really liked. We were looking at I think that was like a pharmaceutical study. So we were looking at, the effects of this pharmaceutical drug on like binge eating and bulimia. Because I was like, okay, like I'm done with my master's. I know I need to get like a little bit more clinical and research experience. So let me like just really focus on what I thought I wanted to do, which was work with eating disorders. So then I got that experience and applied to the doctoral programs. And I actually, it was a couple years of applying, which is a whole nother thing. So it was a long road.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a long road. It sounds like, so many decisions made along the way, and you kind of just keep getting closer and closer and finding your thing. I think with like a typical creative career, what I hear a lot is like there's so many pivots along the way, and this feels much more like a linear path. Can you speak about that a little bit? Did you feel the same way? Did you feel like maybe you were kind of changing direction along the course, or what was your experience like?
Yeah, that's so funny you see it as linear, because it like doesn't feel linear to me at all.
Right? It never does.
Yeah, I know. Maybe it's more like looking back that I can more like see the path. But no, I mean, I guess, compared to like compared to like a more like creative profession. I think there's definitely more of like a path laid out, but yeah, but there's so many different options along the way too. Because I was like, okay, do I want to do the master's program or the doctorate, or do I like and even now it's like, how much do I want to practice versus like I got the doctorate to have more options, but now it's kind of like, okay, how do I want to build my career? Like, do I want to do all clinical? Do I want to do research, clinical, and teach? Like, do I want to do these like creative things too? Because like right now I've been doing a lot of like writing, which I've been really enjoying. So yeah, I feel like even though it's kind of there is kind of a linear path to like getting the degree, and there's certain things you have to do. Like part of the reason I did want to get the doctorate was to like have more options so I could have more like flexibility with like building my day to day. So
That's so cool because I never knew that, even though like maybe from the outside perspective looking in, it might feel like, okay, first you do this, then you do this, then you do this. But really like all those options along the way really are kind of like building blocks. And I think, even at the stage that you're at now, I didn't realize that you would have so many options in front of you, and leveraging your passion for writing paired with therapy and all of your degrees and experience and knowledge can be so powerful. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. Uh I've always wanted to like do writing along with psychology, but I was kind of like figuring out how to do that along the way. Yeah, but I think after like going through grad school and like becoming more of like, I don't want to say like an expert, but becoming more of like a mental health, like someone that feels qualified to like talk on mental health topics. Yeah, I think it's been a great opportunity to be able to like write articles and like speak on mental health issues in a yeah, in a way that's both like creative to me, but I also try to always like do things that I feel like will like help, the general public or help hopefully somebody who's reading it. So that's really behind a lot of what I want to do with writing too, is just, because there's so it's hard for like a layperson or someone that hasn't been through like a lot of school to like understand like this like psych research, so I think that's one of the things I've always wanted to bridge with my writing is like, okay, how can I make like findings in psych research or like summaries of psych research, like how can I make that like accessible, for like the average person reading it? Because it's hard. Like I think it's really hard if you to wade through things on the internet and be like, is this real? Is this real?
100%.
Yeah. So
100%. And I think that, mental health is definitely like at the forefront of a lot of conversation right now, especially as it pertains to, like you say, the internet or social media. And I think there's like so much information. And I guess my question would be, what would be things that like as our audience would look out for to know that it's, written by somebody legit?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah. I think, I think it's good if someone is like saying they're a therapist or speaking out on mental health issues, like to kind of either like make sure they're licensed or so that would either be like a PsyD, a PhD, an MFT or an MSW. And again, someone with a license could be saying unethical things, but I will like once we get licensed, we have like an ethics board we have to report to. So just I think those odds are like a little bit lower that that they'd be saying things that are unethical, although I'm sure it happens. Yeah, and then just kind of knowing the difference too, I think is important. There's like, there's life coaches out there, which I think, no shade to life coaches. I think they can be super helpful. And like, I think every kind of professional has their place, but they're not licensed. So I think it's important for people to know like, okay, a coach might be helpful for more of like coaching things, but maybe not so much for like specific like clinical therapy advice, like with them. So just kind of knowing like, I feel like being an informed consumer is like
I think
helpful.
That's super helpful because there is so much information out there and there's so much misinformation out there. And I think to your point, like, no shade, no kind of hate or shade to life coaches, but anybody can call themselves a life coach. So you really have to make sure
Right.
you're qualifying the source no matter what you're reading and what kind of information you're intaking, especially as it pertains to mental health.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and one thing too, like when I post, I just started getting into like making carousels on Instagram, which is really fun.
Yeah.
For different mental health things, but I really try to make sure like I post like if I'm ever seeing a fact or like referencing research, like I'm always posting a citation so people can like follow it. So that could be something to look for too, especially if people are like posting research claims. Like I would just kind of always be like, okay, like where's
that
this source coming from? Like is this like a legit research article, or is this like a website that looks kind of sketchy,
Absolutely. I am curious about your specialty with eating disorders.
Yeah.
What is the most kind of common theme that you see with a patient that might come to you with an eating disorder? Is there something that, is kind of a consistent theme throughout? Is it often in relation to a relationship with sports? Is it an underlying issue that might be coming from something else? Is it about the food?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I'd say it's different for different people, but I think like one really central theme with most eating disorders is this theme of like control. So a lot of times people will you know, have like traumas in their life or stressors, or things will feel really out of control. And then like wanting to control their body kind of becomes this this thing they can control in their lives. Right. And so, yeah. And I don't think that's true of every eating disorder, or every person with an eating disorder, but I think that's definitely like a central theme. I think too, the more people are exposed to um like dieting from a younger age, or like poor body image like from a younger age, like those are all risk factors for eating disorders too. But also like just trauma is a risk factor for eating disorders. Like having different like layers of oppression in society is a risk factor for eating disorders. So you can almost look at the way I kind of look at eating disorders is like it's you can almost think of some of the behaviors as like a maladaptive response to like life stressors. So it's like yeah, if sometimes like if people are feeling really stressed, they'll like either restrict their food or like binge and purge, and it's kind of it's fulfilling a need in some way, right? So a lot of like my work with patients is like, okay, what need is like this behavior filling, and how can we like try to do something else, right? And talk about the layers of like how that came to happen in the first place.
Got it. This might
Yeah.
be like a totally naive question, but how hard is it? Would you consider an eating disorder a habit?
No, that's a good question.
Is it a disease?
Yeah, so a lot, I like to say, I'm trying to come up with a better metaphor because I don't love that this metaphor has guns in it, but I like to say that like with a lot of mental health disorders, it's like nature loads the gun and nurture can pull the trigger, right? And a lot of psychological disorders have been shown to have some like biological component,
Okay.
eating disorders included. So I think there's definitely a genetic component to eating disorders. But again, there's like that nurture component too, right? Where if you're exposed to stressors, or if you're in a really like like certain environments are really big risk factors for eating disorders too, like ballet, dance, gymnastics, anything where there's like a lot of emphasis on like having a certain kind of body. The military too. Actually, I used to work with a lot of active duty military, and they have to keep their weight down, which is actually can be a risk factor too. So I would say, yeah, if like just looking at the behavior, I think it can definitely become a habit, but I think there's it's like so much more than that too, because then it there's like all these psychological components and biological components. So
yeah, I mean, I that metaphor makes a lot of sense to me, and it kind of makes you feel a little less hopeless in a sense. Like there's things that we can do to get ahead of it. Are there any sort of like overarching kind of generic tips that you would offer, that you would say, like, if you start noticing these things, maybe apply these tactics or habits?
Yeah. No, that's a good question. I mean, I would say, you know, like, with all of us, like, no one's relationship with food or with their body is like perfect, right?
Right.
And I like to say too, like, we live in a very, very imperfect society when it comes to body image and food and things like that. But yeah, but I would just ask yourself, with your own relationship with food and with your body, like, does it ever like stop you from doing things you want to do? Like, does it yeah, because I think it's totally fine to have like health goals or like try to like, have like a healthier, balanced lifestyle. But then, like, does that become super rigid and you don't feel okay like flexibly having like a piece of cake at someone's birthday, right? Or is it like, does it become really obsessive where it's all you can think about? Does it stop you from like doing the things you want to do in your life, right? I think those are kind of the watch outs where you know that, like, okay, maybe my relationship with food or with my body might be an issue. When it kind of I think eating disorders, when they kind of take over, they can just make your life really isolated if it's feeling like they're kind of taking over your life. So I think that's where it kind of becomes a watch out, like very obsessive about food or very obsessive about your body, and there's not like a lot of flexibility, because that's a lot of the work I do with patients, is working towards like food flexibility.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up so many good points. Like, the first thing that comes to mind for me is, I've always thought this would be such a hard thing to have to deal with, because for maybe some other challenges that people might be going through, some other kind of ways of coping, let's say drugs and alcohol, those things can be avoided altogether. But when it comes to eating, we
Right.
have to do it 3 times a day, no matter what.
Right. Yeah.
So it's almost like the problem is kind of presented to you multiple times a day, and you're kind of faced with this challenge multiple times a day.
No, exactly. And that's what a lot of my patients say, because all of patients who have like um uh we call it comorbid, like when you have two things at the same time. So if you have like a substance use disorder and an eating disorder, and they'll be like sober, like say from alcohol, and be like, it's like, I never have to look at alcohol again, but I have to like deal with food like at least 3 times a day. And it's so hard, so I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, and nobody teaches us like really how to have a relationship with food.
No.
I think
Yeah.
subconsciously we're taught, like how you said, depending on how maybe our parents raised us or society, I think there's a lot of influence there. But I was never taught in class, what a healthy relationship with food looked like. I know a lot of like our food pyramids are outdated and portions are outdated. And I think that even just from an early age, like teaching kids something that like I've heard a lot is, when a little kid is saying like that they don't want to eat any more of their dinner or their food, and the parent says like, you can't get it from the table until you're done eating, until your plate is clear. And I think just even from an early age, like that teaches us that you can't be rewarded to get up and get up out of the table until you finished your food, even though you're communicating that you're no longer hungry.
Right. And like I don't love that too, because you're basically teaching your kids to not listen to their like internal hunger
Right.
cues too, or fullness cues. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah. It's
there's
tricky.
been a lot about like intuitive eating too. Is that something that
Yeah.
you're communicating with your patients and your clients?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually it's so fun, because intuitive eating was something that like used to be more of like a niche term, like in eating disorder recovery world. But now I feel like it's become so mainstream, which is amazing. And I love it. But yeah, no, so intuitive eating, like in eating disorder treatment, we like to say like all foods fit and no foods are bad foods, and all foods fit in like moderation, variety, and oh gosh, I forgot the third word, like flexibility. And a lot of times patients with eating disorders, their relationship with food has just been so externalized. Like they're either trying to eat like the lowest calorie thing or trying to follow this really rigid diet, or so intuitive eating is all about like reconnecting ourselves with like our our natural cues of like what our body wants, like, and really like learning how to nourish ourselves again, right? And like trusting our hunger cues and our fullness cues. So that's the goal of a lot of eating disorder treatment, is kind of working towards this intuitive eating and kind of learning what, like, what a diet full of like, balanced nutrition looks like for you, and being able to kind of like trust your body again. So
I love that. And I know you had touched on, your past around sports and how that dynamic can kind of also affect somebody who's really young and impressionable in their relationship with food and their body. I know oftentimes like the success of winning a game can be more important than the player or the athlete taking care of their physical being, which seems like it shouldn't make sense. Can you speak a little bit about that and kind of, what you were sharing, dive a little bit deeper into what you were sharing about your relationship with sports at an early age?
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good question. I think for me, with like sports and nutrition, in high school and even in college, I really didn't know like how to fuel my body properly. Like you said, like no one really tells you. And so it's really hard to learn. So I think like in college more so, we had more like kind of nutritionists talking to us, but high school, I really didn't know like what I was doing. And like looking back, I think I like, with that lack of knowledge, I think I just turned a lot to like different diets or different like things I thought I like should be doing. But I think through that, like, if you're constantly turning to these like external diets, like telling you what to do or how to eat, you really like lose touch with your body's, with like your body's natural cues. So that was one thing for me. Like once I started working in eating disorder treatment, I was like, oh wow, like this is actually like really helpful for me personally, like learning how to like reconnect with your body, and what it needs and what it wants. And, I feel more energized when I have these foods. And, like, I really enjoy this as like my post-dinner snack, and just learning because I had to check like patients' meals when I worked in the residential treatment center. So learning like, okay, this is kind of what like a balanced meal looks like with like starches, proteins, and fats. Like, I think that actually really helped me with like healing my own relationship with food.
Yeah, it's funny. My fiance and I are training, but we're in a program right now getting ready for our wedding. And what they're teaching us about, we're doing strength training. And we also are working with a nutritionist who's kind of setting up some meal plans for us and helping us better understand what our body needs to reach our goals. And it is fascinating. Like everything that I thought I knew is completely opposite from what I'm being taught and told. And I think especially like for me, I used to think that either like in order to lose weight or, have my clothes fit better, my thought process was always like eat less or eat more greens or do more cardio. Like those would be my like 3 go-tos. And what I'm learning now is like, eating more protein and doing more strength training is a lot better in efficiently reaching my goals. So I think like it's also important to, and of course, like that's just me on my own personal scenario. But what I think is important for people to know is to really seek out professional help and guidance so that they can understand what their goals are and really find an efficient way to get there. Because with all this information out there, it's so hard to figure out what's going to work best for you. And you're trying one thing one day and it's not working and you feel so defeated. That can also take a toll on negative mental health. Are there any resources or kind of maybe go-to guides or just anything that we would be able to tap into to learn a little bit more about some of these topics?
Well, the book Intuitive Eating is really good. That like talks more about just kind of these things we've been talking about. There's also a workbook. See, I literally use it for a group I teach on intuitive eating. It's the Intuitive Eating workbook. So 10 principles for nourishing a healthy relationship with food. I think if if I didn't really mention this so much, but so in eating disorder treatment, we really focus on this concept of like health at every size too. So we don't focus on weight loss like at all. We focus on just like different metrics of health and looking at health in this more holistic way. Because I think sometimes this notion of health can be so focused and tied to weight, and a lot of times for people with eating disorders or disordered eating, that's just like not helpful. So there's a great book called Health at Every Size that talks about this more. I'd recommend that one too. So
yeah, it's such a good point, because I think you're right. Most of the time eating disorders or health, it's kind of like centered around weight loss, but there's so much more to know about even just like powering our bodies to feel energized and for like our brain function, especially like whether you're working in academics or creative industry, whatever it is. I think even just like working remote for a lot of people that's kind of taken a toll. Like fast food and just access to getting something delivered, in 15 minutes to your front door has taken a toll too. And I think that there is starting to be more conversation around how food affects like brain fog and fatigue and all these different things. But I feel like there's not enough conversation around it or enough information around it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. There's some great, I really like some dietitians I follow on Instagram too. I follow mostly like anti-diet dietitians because they're, it's kind of what I support just in my own work. So, there's this great one. Her name's Vitamin Ree. So her name's Marie, and she goes Vitamin Ree, and she talks a lot about like anti-diet, dietitian kind of stuff. So all the stuff we've been talking about, like how to fuel your body and like how you can focus on health goals that aren't weight centered from a dietitian perspective. So I find that really helpful. I work with dietitians like every day, so I really value their insights. Yeah.
Do you think it's like something that everybody would benefit from going to speak with a dietitian? Or is it really geared towards a specific type of person with a specific type of need?
I mean, I'm a little biased, but I think it would be helpful. But then again, I'm definitely biased towards like anti-diet dietitians, and people have like different like because I know like personally that's like what I would find most helpful and what my patients would find most helpful is this like but I also recognize that like like everybody has everybody might find different things helpful. I mean, like you said, and like we were saying earlier, like I think no one kind of teaches you what to eat
exactly
growing up. So and again, like dietitians are like a lot of people don't know the differences between a dietitian and a nutritionist too.
I don't. Yeah, can you share?
Yeah. So a dietitian is someone that's like been in a master's program, gone to school, done an internship. Whereas a nutritionist is not a protected term. So you can like you and I could just call ourselves a nutritionist. But again, I don't want to like, I think people like have their place. A nutritionist can be really helpful, but but it's definitely like different levels of education and training too. So kind of knowing that, and I always look at too, like, okay, like what is this, like, especially on Instagram and social media, like what is this person kind of trying to sell me? Like, are they trying to say like, oh, like you should go on the shake diet, and then they sell the shake diet? Like that's a little suspicious,
Yes.
So yeah.
That's a good hot tip.
So follow the money a little bit, but no, to circle back, I mean, I definitely think, if that's something people feel like they could benefit from, like I think dietitians have so much knowledge to offer, and a lot of times it's a resource like people don't necessarily like think of, but
because I think as when we're younger, obviously we can't control the education that what we learn in school, but as adults we really do have the power to take that education into our own hands and to tap into some of these resources that maybe we were unaware of before, or we're just learning about for the first time, and be our own guru and get our own information. And I think there's just so much of it out there that being able to speak to a a professional who can sit down with you and really map out, what it is that your needs are, might be a beneficial resource for people to tap into.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think so. I would think so. Yeah.
Amazing.
But I'm biased. Yeah.
Before we wrap up, is there anything that you want to leave our audience with? Any kind of overarching tips or tricks, any advice, maybe some amazing advice that you've heard along the way in your journey that you wanted to pass along?
Yeah, I think for me, like what helped me a lot in healing, my own body image and just becoming more like confident in the world was looking at like, okay, who is like profiting from me being like insecure and like having a poor body image, and like also like just noticing like the hypocrisy and the complete inconsistencies of like societal like expectations of like what like beauty is, or like a quote good body is, and just like realizing like how like for example, I'll give you an example. So like I remember growing up, so I have like full lips, right? These are natural. And I remember growing up, it was like not cool to have full lips. It was like the 90s, and it was a terrible era for body image, and it was not cool. And like I remember Angelina Jolie did, and it was like kind of seen as weird. And then all of a sudden, like 10 or 15, or like in the 2010s, it was like everyone was getting lip fillers, and like people were asking me like, oh, like where'd you get your fillers? And I was like, I didn't, but also like beauty standards are so temperamental, and like, so it's just, I think, I don't know. I think just really like learning to like have a relationship with your body and with food where you can kind of shut out that societal noise is really important. And like do activities that help you connect to your body, and, really find what kind of diet and relationship with food works for you, because I just think there's so much external noise, and like the noise wants to get you to buy things, right? So I think the more you can like cultivate this relationship with yourself that can like shut that out, the like better off you'll be.
It's such a good point, because I mean, it kind of taps a little bit into like the beauty industry too, and even like the fashion industry, right? Where it's like, with trends, the pendulum always swings. And I even think about it with like eyebrows, how like it used to be so cool to have this like really, really thin eyebrow. And now everybody has these thin eyebrows. And now what they're marketing to us is like these thick, full, bushy eyebrows. And all so these funny. Different, products and beauty techniques. And you could probably map that out or chart that out with almost any thing that is cool or relevant or whatever, however you want to classify it, as good, right, by society now. At one point it probably wasn't. So I like that it's almost like this like feeling of intuitive eating, but also for like intuitive like beauty, or even like intuitive like style.
Yeah.
We can coin the term for every industry.
Yeah. Yeah, there you go.
Well, it was so good to chat with you, Courtney. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and a little bit more about your process. I think you offer so much value, and thank you so much for the work that you're doing.
Yeah, no, of course. Thank you for having me. I'll keep following all your creative endeavors on Instagram.
Yes. Thank you so much for listening to the Hola Gwapa podcast. I hope you gained as much value and inspiration from today's episode as I did. If you love what you heard, please make sure you rate and review this episode wherever you're listening. It really helps to spread episodes like this one to other creatives looking for their daily dose of inspiration, and I would be forever grateful. But before we go, make sure you head to holagwapa.com to discover my very own passion project, Gwapa, a small batch slow fashion line. Each piece from the collection is artist made in San Diego, California, and designed to inspire your next creative adventure: swim, sweat, street, or studio. With that, have a beautiful week, Gwapas, and as always, sending you tons of inspiration and lots of love.